My name is Robin Greenberg, and I was 37 years old when I learned that love, when paired with entitlement, can turn quietly dangerous. From the outside, my life looked settled, predictable even. I had been married to Matthew Greenberg for 6 years. We lived in a four-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where people waved but never asked questions, the kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. My father, Richard Greenberg, was 68 and lived on the same property in a converted garage apartment I had built for him myself. After my mother passed, I couldn't stand the thought of him rattling around alone in that empty house they'd shared for 40 years. So I used my inheritance for the down payment on our home and spent another $15,000 finishing out the garage insulation plumbing. A small kitchen. Everything he needed. Richard was self-sufficient. He paid his share of utilities, bought his own groceries, never interfered. If anything, he made our lives easier. He fixed things before I even noticed they were broken, gave us space, treated our home like a privilege, not a right. Matthew's parents, Leonard and Carol Foster, lived 2 hours away, retired early, healthy, social. Leonard golfed several times a week. Carol ran a book club and volunteered at the library. They owned their house outright and traveled more than we did. Just last month, they'd gone on a Mediterranean cruise. Which is why, when Matthew brought it up, I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. "We need to talk about the living situation," he said one Tuesday night, not looking up from his plate. I asked what he meant, already uneasy. "My parents are getting older," he continued. "They need family support. They should move in with us." I remember blinking. Once, maybe twice, trying to catch up. "They're on a cruise," I said carefully. "Right now." "That's not the point," he replied. "They won't always be able to do that." Something about the way he said it, flat rehearsed, made my stomach tighten. "So what's the plan?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "They move into the garage apartment. Your dad goes into a facility." The room went silent. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd my brain rejected it outright. "You're serious," I said. "Completely." He went on about pensions, cost fairness, about how his parents had sacrificed for him, about how my father would adjust. That was the moment I understood this wasn't concern. It was calculation. And when I told him no, when I said my father was staying, Matthew's face didn't crumple in disappointment. It hardened. "Then my parents move in anyway," he said. "Family comes first." That night, lying awake beside a man who suddenly felt like a stranger, I realized something fundamental had shifted. And once that line was crossed, there was no uncrossing it. By morning, the argument hadn't cooled. It had fermented. Matthew moved through the house with a tight, performative calm, the kind people use when they believe they're being reasonable and the other person is being irrational. He made coffee without asking if I wanted any, left cabinet doors open, sighed loudly when I didn't speak first. I replayed the conversation from the night before on a loop, trying to locate the moment where it had gone wrong, where a discussion about planning ahead had turned into my father being treated like an obstacle to be removed. When I finally brought it up again, Matthew didn't hesitate. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult," he said, leaning against the counter. "This is about family." "I agree," I replied, "which is why my father is staying exactly where he is." That's when the tone changed. "You're choosing him over me," he said quietly enough that it almost sounded like pain instead of accusation. I stared at him. "That's not what this is." "It's exactly what it is," he insisted. "My parents need us. They gave up everything for me. And you're acting like they're asking for something outrageous." "They're asking me to send my widowed father to a nursing home," I said, "so they can take the space I built for him." Matthew ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "You keep framing it like that." "Because that's what it is." The argument stretched on for hours, looping in circles that always landed in the same place. He cried at one point, real tears, or at least convincing ones, said I was cold, that I lacked empathy, that if the roles were reversed, he'd do anything for my parents. I noticed he never answered when I asked why his parents couldn't stay in their own home. By midnight, I was exhausted, angry, and deeply unsettled by how easily he dismissed my father's dignity when it conflicted with his comfort. I went to bed without resolution. At 3 a.m, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, a thought crept in, quiet at first, then sharper the longer I held it. If he wanted his parents to move in no matter what, then fine. They could move in, just not the way he expected. The next morning, I poured coffee and sat across from him at the table, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been all week. "You're right," I said. "Family comes first." His head snapped up. "Really?" "Yes," I continued. "Your parents should move in." Relief flooded his face so fast it almost startled me. He smiled, reached for my hand, thanked me for finally understanding what matters. What about my dad? He asked cautiously. He's staying, I said. That doesn't change. Matthew hesitated, but the victory was too sweet to question. When are they back from their cruise? I asked. Next Thursday, he said. I'll call them today. Perfect, I replied. I'll get their space ready. I spent the next week in the basement. Not the guest rooms, not the office, the basement. And with every concrete floor scrubbed, every extension cord plugged in, every cheap purchase stacked into a corner, my resolve hardened. Because if Matthew believed family first meant sacrificing mine for his, he was about to learn how literal I could be. The basement had always been an afterthought. Concrete floors, exposed studs, one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling like an accusation, boxes stacked without logic, holiday decorations, old furniture tools I never used anymore. There was a utility sink and a toilet from when the house was built, but no warmth, no comfort, no illusion that someone actually belonged there. By the end of the week, it technically qualified as living space. I made several trips to the store while Matthew assumed I was upstairs clearing out the guest rooms. $800 disappeared into air mattresses, folding chairs, a cheap card table, plastic shelving, a space heater, extension cords, and a thrift store dresser with drawers that stuck if you pulled too fast. I scrubbed the concrete until my hands burned, pushed everything we owned to one side, and strung up old curtains to create the idea of rooms. It looked like a storage unit pretending to be a home, but it had electricity, running water, heat, and that was the point. I even typed up a lease agreement late one night, half joke, half prophecy. $800 a month. Utility increase split. Kitchen access during set hours. Quiet times. 30 days notice. I didn't show Matthew. He was too busy on the phone with his mother laughing, telling her how excited he was that we were finally becoming a real family. Leonard and Carol returned from their cruise, tanned, energized, posting photos everywhere. When Sunday arrived, they pulled into the driveway in Leonard's Cadillac luggage, packed smiling like people who believed they were being welcomed into something better than they'd left behind. Matthew opened the door. Welcome home. Carol hugged him. Where are our rooms? I stepped forward. I'll show you. I led them past the stairs, past the guest rooms, past Matthew's confused stare, down to the basement door. When I flipped on the light, the silence was immediate and absolute. This is the basement, Leonard said. Yes, I replied. Your space. Carol's face twisted. You expect us to live down here? You're moving in, I said evenly. This is where... Matthew finally found his voice. Robin, what are you doing? Their rooms are upstairs. I looked at him. You said they were moving in. You didn't specify where. I handed Leonard the lease. Carol began to cry, not softly, loudly, angrily. I'm not paying rent to live in a basement, Leonard snapped. Then don't move in, I said. Those are the options. Matthew ripped the paper from Leonard's hands. What the hell is wrong with you? What's wrong, I replied, is trying to evict my father so your parents can live rent-free in the space I built for him. The argument that followed was explosive. Shouting, accusations, Carol sobbing, Leonard threatening, Matthew pleading, and then screaming. I stood still. They're welcome to stay under the terms I've offered, I said. Or they can leave. They left. The Cadillac peeled out of the driveway like it had been insulted personally. Matthew didn't speak to me for 2 days. But that silence didn't mean peace. It meant escalation. The silence lasted exactly 48 hours. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses on your chest and dares you to break first. Matthew slept in the guest room. Ate without me. Spoke to walls instead of answering questions. When I passed him in the hallway, he looked through me like I'd become an inconvenience instead of his wife. I didn't chase him. That seemed to unsettle him more than any argument could have. On the third day, the silence broke not with an apology, but with an accusation. You humiliated my parents, he said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed. You humiliated me. What I did, I replied, was refuse to sacrifice my father so yours could live for free. That basement stunt was cruel, he snapped. You know that. What was cruel, I said calmly, was trying to send my widowed father to a nursing home without his consent. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried a different angle. Tears. Shaking voice. His mother hadn't slept. His father was furious. Everyone thought I was heartless. I didn't budge. That's when the dirty tactics started. First came social media. Matthew's sister Lauren, someone I barely spoke to, began posting vague quotes about respecting elders and toxic people who forget where they came from. Photos of Leonard and Carol looking solemn on their porch. Comment sections filled with strangers agreeing that some wives forget their place. Matthew liked every post. Then my father called me. Everything okay? He asked gently. Carol had called him, told him I was planning to move him out soon, that Matthew was scared to tell him. My father laughed in her ear and hung up. Next came the money. We had separate accounts and one joint household account for bills. I noticed a transfer, $1,500 sent to Carol. For their expenses, Matthew said when I confronted him. Since you were so cruel. They're at a casino resort, I replied. That's not struggling. I moved my contribution out of the joint account the next morning. Then came the lease email. I revised it, made it cleaner, clearer, more official. Sent it directly to Leonard and Carol. Carol replied in 5 minutes. You're a disgrace, I replied once. Offer expires in 7 days. Matthew found out when his phone rang, and Carol screamed. You're trying to extort my parents, he yelled. I'm offering housing below market rate, I said. That's generosity. That's when Matthew crossed the line I couldn't ignore. He came home one night, sat across from me, and said quietly, I looked into senior living communities. My blood went cold. For who, I asked. For your father, he said. It's better for everyone. Better for everyone except the man who raised me. In that moment, I understood something clearly and without illusion. This wasn't about space. It wasn't about money. It was about whose family mattered more. And Matthew had already chosen. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hands on the table or storm out of the room. I just sat there staring at Matthew, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one I thought I'd married. You talk to facilities, I repeated slowly, without telling me. I was being proactive, he said. There's a really nice place about 30 minutes away. Activities. Medical staff, people his age. My father doesn't need medical staff, I said. He needs dignity. Matthew sighed like I was the unreasonable one. You're too close to this. That sentence did something to me. It snapped the last thread of doubt I had about whether this could still be fixed. You want my father gone, I said, so your parents can take the space I built for him. After everything that's happened, you still think that's acceptable. He didn't answer. He just looked tired, annoyed. And that silence was louder than any confession. I love you, he said finally, but you love your father more than me. Yes, I replied. Right now I do. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. That night, my father knocked on my door. He asked again if he should leave, if it would make things easier. I told him if he left, I would file for divorce the next day. He hugged me and said nothing more. The lease offer expired the following morning. I sent the updated version, $1,200 a month. Leonard called and screamed, called me names, threatened me with lawyers, told me Matthew would take me for everything. Looking forward to it, I said, and hung up. 2 days later, Matthew sat me down. My lawyer says we need to talk about asset division. I blinked. Your lawyer? I filed yesterday, he said. You'll be served next week. The word divorce didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It felt inevitable. That afternoon, I called a lawyer of my own. Her name was Grace Miller, and she changed everything. Grace Miller didn't raise her voice or make promises she couldn't keep. She listened. She listened while I laid everything out. The demand to remove my father, the basement, the money transfer, the lease, the threats, the sudden filing. She asked for dates, documents, screenshots, voicemails. When I finished, she folded her hands and said something that settled my stomach for the first time in weeks. He doesn't have the leverage he thinks he has. The house was mine, purchased before the marriage, down payment from my mother's inheritance. I had paid the majority of the mortgage for 6 years. Matthew was entitled to some equity, but not control, not my father's home, not my life. When Matthew realized I had retained counsel, the tone shifted from righteous anger to strategic cruelty. His parents started calling my relatives, telling them I was financially abusive, that I'd isolated him, that I was controlling. My aunt called, confused and worried. I explained everything slowly, calmly, with receipts. She called Carol back and tore into her so thoroughly Carol blocked her. Then Matthew tried my father. He showed up at the garage apartment while I was at work crying, saying I'd changed, saying he was scared of me, saying he needed help convincing me to go to counseling. My father put him on speaker and called me. I know what you asked Robin to do, my father said evenly. You don't get to rewrite that. Matthew left in tears and told his parents my father had verbally attacked him. Leonard threatened to come over and handle it. I told him if he set foot on my property, I'd call the police. He didn't come. Then Matthew went lower. A police officer knocked on my door one afternoon. Matthew had filed a report claiming I'd destroyed his personal property in a fit of rage. The property in question, old photo albums he'd left in the basement years earlier. They were dusty. That was it. The officer looked embarrassed, warned me quietly that Matthew was trying to establish a pattern, told me to document everything. I already had. Mediation lasted 4 weeks. Matthew demanded the house half my retirement and for me to cover his legal fees because I'd caused the divorce. Grace dismantled that argument piece by piece. In the end, we settled. I kept the house. My father stayed. Matthew received $35,000 for his share of equity. We kept our own retirement accounts. No alimony. He signed like someone swallowing poison. As he walked out, he looked at me and said, "You're stealing from me." Grace replied before I could. "She's giving you more than you're entitled to." Matthew didn't speak to me again, but his parents tried. The divorce finalized 3 weeks later. Matthew moved back in with his parents, ironically, the very people who had insisted they needed our house to survive. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard it was going about as well as you'd expect. Constant arguments, no privacy, Carol inserting herself into everything, Leonard controlling finances for everyone's good. Shocking. Carol sent one final text before I blocked her. "You destroyed my son's life. You'll die alone and miserable." I didn't reply. Leonard tried to get the last word through my father, left him a voicemail about real men and family duty. My father responded once. "Real men don't try to steal another person's home. Lose this number." They did. The house is quiet now. I repainted the bedroom, turned the guest room back into my office. The basement is still unfinished. Sometimes I go down there and see the deflated air mattresses in the corner and laugh not because it was kind, but because it was necessary. My father still lives in his apartment. We have dinner together twice a week. He misses my mother, but he says having family close makes the days easier. Matthew hasn't contacted me since mediation. Last week I got a text from an unknown number. "This is Leonard. Carol's in the hospital." I forwarded it to Matthew. He didn't respond. I blocked the number. Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. Family first is a weapon people use when they want you to sacrifice yourself quietly. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. My father is safe, my home is mine,